Hello, I'm Pastor Hilly. Thank you for joining us for Faith Lutheran Church's Adult Forum series. We're calling this episode Bible Food. And I say we because there's a special co-host for this episode of Adult Forum. But before we get to that, a brief reminder that during this time of social distancing, there is wonderful ministry coming out of the community that we call Faith Lutheran Church here in Whitehall, Ohio. Ministry that includes this very podcast. If you would like to support the ministry of faith financially, please see the link labeled Giving in the description below. Now, on to the episode. And as I said, today we have a special guest. It's Caroline.
Hi.
Caroline, who is here with us all the way from Connecticut. She decided to come out and weather this storm of quarantining and social distancing here in the great Columbus land area. And I am thrilled she is with us. Caroline, how are you today?
Terrific. Got lots of fresh air today. Got some work done this morning. Did some cooking. That's pretty much it.
That sounds like a great day.
For quarantine. Yeah, it's not so bad, huh?
Absolutely. That's a great day, quarantine or not.
Yeah.
You know, they never talk about the good parts of working from home. And that's one of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Snack time anytime you want.
Nap time anytime you want.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. And so, I mean, with that being said, I guess, how are you making out with all this social distancing? Is that a little weird? I mean, we spent time on the trail yesterday. We took the Alum Creek Trail down to Three Creeks Park. We saw, 10 people for the 2 hours we were out?
Yeah, I wasn't busy at all. Nothing's really busy, which is the way it should be, but also kind of nice for us because we had the trail to ourselves, just about.
And you're 100% correct. That is the way it should be. Everybody stay healthy, stay safe, stay at an appropriate distance of about 6 feet between people. But when you do get the opportunity to go outside, it is kind of fun to feel like you have the entire park to yourself. Mm-hmm. Can't complain.
Sure.
And so your family's back in Connecticut. How are they all doing?
They're doing really well. I don't think that quarantining is really too much different from the way they live anyway, because they live out in the middle of the woods, so it's kind of like another day for them. They just find stuff to do around the house, and the only thing is Dad can't go to the grocery store every day like he likes to. My brother's wrenching on some cars, and my sister's still working, so she doesn't work with too many people. She's a biologist, so she works in very small teams in Florida.
And your mom is a beekeeper. Your mom has bees.
Yes.
How are the bees maintaining the needed 6 feet between each other for social distancing?
From what I can tell, yes, they're doing a terrific job.
Good. As long as the bees are social distancing, the rest of us are fine.
Yep.
And so, Caroline, since we are about to discuss food, meals, and recipes, you and I have been to the grocery store a few times. How would you describe the atmosphere and, let's say, selection at grocery stores around the city?
It seems like the selection is there. There's pretty much everything I've looked for, depending on the store. And it always seems like it's the crowd is pretty much what it is an hour before it closes, maybe a half hour before it closes. So not a lot of people. They're constantly wiping things down, it seems, at Market District anyway. And seems like they're taking precautions to keep everything clean. But I think they have everything pretty fully stocked.
I'd agree. And I think that your description there is perfect, right? It kind of feels like when you're at a grocery store an hour before it closes any other time of the year. There's a little sense of urgency, but no one's aggressive or no one's mean. I haven't seen any fist fights. Everybody's calm and everyone's very polite.
Yep.
And that's always really good. I always make a point to talk to the cashiers and the bag people on the way out. And I always ask them, hey, how is everybody treating you? And everybody seems to be in really good spirits. So
people seem to be doing a pretty good job of keeping the 6-foot rule too,
Yeah.
even in walking on sidewalks.
Yeah. We saw that the other day. We were walking in Bexley, and we were going to walk in the main gate of Capitol, and these people were coming the other way, and they stopped and took the long way around. Mm-hmm. And the lady was so polite. She goes, "Hey, it's nothing against you. I'm sure you're wonderful people, but we need to stay 6 feet apart."
Yeah.
You know, that was really nice and cute of her.
Yeah.
All right, so in front of us, we have a book. It is a cookbook, and it is titled Food at the Time of the Bible. It's written by Miriam Feinberg Vamosh. I think I just butchered her name. Miriam, I got that right. Feinberg is her middle name. Vamosh, Vamosh. I will put a link to this book on Amazon in the description below this video for everybody if you want to look at this book after the fact or while you're listening to it. It's a wonderful book that's part history and part recipes. But before we continue, I want to underscore that this is not a biblical text. These are not recipes taken step by step and ingredient by ingredient out of the Bible. But what they are recipes that the author has researched and wrapped in the scripture for context. So she gives them tie-ins to stories in the Bible. And what we end up with are recipes with really cool connections, like Solomon's chicken shish kebab or Martha's meatballs or things like that. Caroline, I know you've read a lot more of this book than I have, so what are your thoughts on it?
No, I really enjoyed it for a couple of reasons that you mentioned, was that it's part history and then part recipes. So they included a timeline of the discovery of ingredients in early settlements, I thought, which was pretty neat. And they mentioned a lot of the times of cultivation and when like olives were traded, and I thought that was kind of neat because we take some of those things for granted just to have a grocery store full of these things, but spices were very valuable, and olive oil and olives were traded. I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, there was.
You know, you're 100% right. I remember my mom telling me stories about my grandmother who, when my mother was in elementary school and middle school and whatnot, and my grandmother would take her to the grocery store, and my grandmother said to my mother, and this is a story I've heard, that she never forgot the day where she remembered that you could get a banana 12 months out of the year in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And we just assume, all right, it's the middle of November and we live in Ohio. I want a tomato. Let me go to Kroger and there's always a tomato.
Yeah.
But to think about these spices and these various like meats and ingredients and things that are being used, they all have to be harvested.
Harvested and packaged or ground and somehow packaged. And I mean, pottery didn't even come into existence until, thousands of years ago. But they still had to create those vessels to transport olives, olive oils, spices, those sort of things.
You couldn't air dry it and put it on an 18-wheeler and get it from Jerusalem to Galilee overnight.
Right.
Yeah. And it's all those little, I say this all the time, if my grandmother was still living and I told her that one of the most expensive restaurants in Brooklyn, their gimmick is that they grew their own food and it went from their farm to their table, my grandmother would laugh and say, well, where else would it come from? Yeah. But she grew up during the Depression. And that was just the case it was. All right, so here we go. First recipe, I kind of gave a teaser for it. Solomon's chicken shish kebab. All right, so here's our let me give you the brief biblical reminder, and then we're going to let Caroline tell us a little bit about she's going to tell us the ingredients for the recipe, a little bit about the recipe. One final note here before we crack into Solomon's dish. We will not be reading all the recipes line for line in this podcast just due to time constrictions. But if you'd like to see them again, we're going to have a description. We're going to have a link for this book in the description below this video. So please click on that if you're interested. So Solomon's chicken shish kebab. King Solomon, the wisest man in the entire Old Testament, was the son of King David. My favorite King Solomon story is the one where there are two women who are arguing over an infant, and their case is heard before the king. And King Solomon looks at the two women and he goes, all right, there's one baby, there's two of you, cut the baby in half, and you take half and you take half. And then one of the women said, yeah, that works for me. And the other woman said, no, if it's going to cause harm to the child, I'd rather the other woman take him. And so King Solomon understood and saw the wisdom and the kindness in that woman and awarded her the child because he knew that answer was the answer of a true mother's love. So just a great guy, just a great guy. And, you can tell he was smart because we're talking about a chicken shish kebab and not a pork shish kebab because, the pork was unclean and that sort of thing for Jewish culture of the time. So, Caroline, tell me, what do we have in this recipe?
Okay, so the marinade is 1 clove of garlic, a tablespoon of chopped cilantro, 4 teaspoons of ground cumin, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, a tablespoon of saffron, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah. Mix it all up, marinate it on the chicken, and then just grill it up, and boom, shish kebab.
Shish kebab. So when I was in seminary, I worked at a Mediterranean restaurant there in Chicago, and we had a lot of lamb. We cooked a lot of lamb, and we had both lamb shish kebabs and lamb kefta kebabs. And kebab, at least in Mediterranean restaurants, is essentially means on a stick. So whatever it is that is kebabbed, lamb kebab, shish kebab, vegetable kebab, literally a thing on a stick. I like to call cake pops cake kebabs. Right? If you get a piece of honeydew melon, which, why would you ever eat honeydew melon? But if you get honeydew melon on a stick at the fair, it is fruit kebab. Right? That's how this works. And so at least in the Mediterranean cooking world, the difference between shish and kefta is shish is meat that is ground, like a hamburger or ground chicken or ground lamb. Kefta is lamb that is cooked the way you would cook, it is meat that is cut the way that you would cut steak tips or steak. It's a non-ground cutting of the meat, whereas shish is ground. So in the recipe, does it say ground chicken?
It actually says remove chicken from bone and cut into bite-sized pieces.
Oh, look at that.
Maybe the author thought it was just a general term.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, I see that a lot, And again, it might have just been the owner of the restaurant I worked at. But for him, he was like, shish means this, kefta means that. Mm-hmm. But who knows?
Yeah.
So what was about this recipe that stood out to you?
It has saffron in it. And saffron is a very expensive spice. I actually looked it up on Amazon. It goes for... was it $1,800 to $2,700 a pound?
Oh wow!
So it's super expensive. It's super tedious to pick. It's got to be harvested all by hand. So it's just the style and stigma of a flower, which is just the center part. It receives the pollen, and apparently has a terrific flavor, which. We tried truffles last week or the week before, which truffles are pretty rare and tasty, but those did not pay a whole lot for truffles. Somehow I managed to get them for $8 for 2 little truffles, which isn't bad at all, I thought, because I thought they were super pricey. But saffron is very expensive, so I thought that was sort of fitting for this recipe for Solomon's shish kebab because it had saffron in it.
Nice.
Saffron is just a super pricey, fancy spice.
And it would make sense if, Solomon being a king would have that kind of money. Mm-hmm. So Solomon would have the money, A, for the meat of the chicken, which if you're a common person or a peasant, you're not able to afford meat from let alone a whole chicken that you get to remove the bones from. And then secondly, you wouldn't be able, or his money allows him to purchase things like saffron. So unless you have the money, you can't afford two of the main ingredients of this dish.
Yeah, he must have got first dibs on the chicken, getting the meat out of it.
Yeah. Well, nice.
Bones.
Cool. Moving down the road to the next recipe. Caroline and I are probably going to both butcher this word. Pharaoh's Malokia soup. Pharaoh's Malokia soup.
Yeah.
So we all know Pharaoh. Let's kind of put him in the context of Exodus. Moses says, "Let my people go." The Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He said that a couple plagues come, 10 plagues or so. The people escape. Pharaoh sends his army to get the Israelites and bring them back. The Red Sea parts. Moses and the Israelites cross through the Red Sea. But then when the Pharaoh's army is crossing the Red Sea to get the Israelites, the waters come crashing again down as Moses, who at least in my mind, and I think in a lot of people's minds, is still played by Charlton Heston, stands there and the story continues. Which I always like. Have you ever played the game The 10 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
I thought it was 6.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. 6 degrees. 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Game I have not. No.
It's this game that you name Kevin Bacon and you name another actor, and by naming movies that they've both that Kevin Bacon was in this movie with somebody else, and that person was in this movie with somebody else. It only takes 6 movies to get from Kevin Bacon to anybody else. And I just like thinking about people who are in different movies together. Like Charlton Heston was Moses, right? And Charlton Heston also was in the original Planet of the Apes, which is really cool. Just I kind of like thinking about Planet of the Apes characters in the Old Testament, just because that's great. Also, more importantly, Charlton Heston was in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes remake in 2002, in which Paul Giamatti was also in. And Paul Giamatti, I can get you anywhere. He was in I believe he was in Shutter Island, which is my favorite movie ever. So I can get Moses and the Planet of the Apes onto Shutter Island.
Look at that.
This conversation has gone
Great
so
job,
far
Pastor
off the rails. It's gone off the rails.
Great job.
So Pharaoh's Malokia soup, we just talked about this. So Caroline, tell us of this soup, what goes in the pot?
What goes in the pot? Looks like 4 cups of chicken stock, a pound of Swiss chard, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 3 finely chopped garlic cloves, a tablespoon of ground coriander, salt and pepper, and a teaspoon of flour.
Now, the first thing you said was chicken stock, right? And so in Solomon's chicken shish kebab, Solomon as king ate the chicken that was prepared and put on a stick. So what do you think it tells us that this is a stock and not the meat itself?
They got the leftovers.
They got the
But
leftovers.
the leftovers are actually very good for you because I just did this the other day, simmered down some chicken bones to make a really nice full flavored chicken stock. And what that's good for is actually your immunity, for boosting your ability to fight illness. And then it just, the water in the boiling process sort of pulls all those good nutrients into the water, like gelatin, minerals, calcium, protein, phosphorus, which is all really good when you're, being worked hard and staying up late and you need that nutrition. Yeah.
Because, during the time of Pharaoh, it was a war-conquering culture. So if Pharaoh's army took over another nation, everyone who was conquered, everyone who was enslaved, part of that enslavement, a lot of them were put right into the military. And so your army got bigger as you got more people by conquering more countries. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense. What you just said is that this is the leftovers. This is the things that are thrown away or discarded, which if we think about American history, is the basis of so much soul food. It was the food that the plantation owners were throwing away and discarding. And the slaves on the plantation would take that, figure out how to cook it and how to get sustenance out of it. And so that's really interesting to kind of see this biblically framed kind of almost maybe soul food in a way.
And when I made my chicken stock, that's what it was. I left a little bit of the skin on it around the bones, and it just, all that fat warmed up and sort of blended into the water in the stock and just made for a really delicious soup.
Nice.
Yeah.
And this recipe looks really easy. Again, there's a description. In the description below this video, we'll put a link for this book, but it looks really easy. Mm-hmm. It's a soup, right? You throw it in a pot, you get ready, you go, you come back later.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yep.
Speaking of soup, so we're about to get to another one. Our third recipe is Jacob's lentil soup. A quick biblical framing for that. Jacob was the son of Isaac. He was the brother of Esau. Jacob is the one who famously saw Jacob's ladder, etc. The direct story tied into this one is, Jacob stole Esau's birthright because Esau was a great hunter and he would spend the entire day out on the land hunting and that sort of thing. And Jacob saw Esau coming back and he prepared a stew. In Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 through 34. And as Esau comes in, he's so famished. He goes, "Man, that smells so good." And Jacob goes, "Oh, I'll give you a bowl of soup, but it'll cost you." And he goes, "Oh, anything. What is it?" And he goes, "I want your birthright. I want your inheritance." And so eventually this exchange happens, and Jacob gets Esau's birthright. Esau gets a bowl of soup, and a sibling rivalry that leads to a small war kind of follows. So, Caroline, what can you tell us? What is this recipe that is so good that it's good enough to barter inheritance with?
So Jacob's lentil soup has 1.5 cups of split red lentils, 6 cups of chicken stock, 1 medium onion cubed, 1 leek, a half a teaspoon of ground cumin, salt and pepper, some more onion sliced, 2 stalks of celery, 1 carrot, 1 tablespoon of white wine vinegar, and some olive oil.
That's good. That sounds great.
So there's really no like shining star ingredient in this recipe except maybe the lentils. That's kind of what stood out for me because I made lentil soup before and it doesn't photograph very well. It's cooking in the pot. It looks terrible, but it tastes good when you add in all those spices and onions and just the flavorings and everything. And the lentils are great. They're a great lunch because they provide a lot of fiber and actually have a great source of protein. So I mean it's a good sustainable soup. I'm not sure that I would trade my birthright for it, but I bet it smelled delicious with the onion and everything sort of.
Especially if he was already hungry.
Yeah. Yep.
So before this, we were talking about Pharaoh's soup, and now it's Jacob's soup. Why do you think we're running into? I mean, there are a number of soups in the book. Why do we think there are so many soups in the book?
It's a good way to just kind of throw whatever you have hanging around into a pot. Mm-hmm. You add some extra spices, and it kind of takes on a whole new flavor rather than the flavor of like old. Let's see, what would they put in there? Maybe like an old onion,
Yeah.
or something like that. But they can be sustainable, and it's a good way to nourish and get some hydration in there. And
nice.
Yeah, they didn't have a refrigerator, but now it's a good way to clean out your fridge.
It is a great way to clean out your refrigerator. Boil some water, throw everything in there.
Soup or a pot pie. Yep.
Throw some Captain Crunch, some barbecue sauce, just see how that comes out.
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I would go that far, but
no.
That's your refrigerator. Yeah.
That is my refrigerator. Yeah. Whew. All right, so coming into recipe number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, Abigail's toasted grain. And this one, we found this recipe. We were looking through this book, and Caroline goes, "Who's Abigail?" And I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna have to look that up. And it took a little digging. The story Abigail comes to us. She's a character in a story found in the 25th chapter of First Samuel. So kind of tucked there right around Kings in the writings of the Old Testament. So David, before he became King David, he was normal David, and normal David was fleeing the army of King Saul, and David was going with all of his men because there's a big war between David and Saul and that sort of thing. And it just so happened that it was the time of year that sheep shearing happened, and David's men were parched because they had been on the run and also shearing their sheep. And they were, to add to that, they were in short supply of goods and foods and water and things. So David sends them to a local man because he sees a house in the distance. And he says, just go ask that guy, be polite, be humble, and ask him for water and supplies. Well, the man they asked, his name was Nabal. And let's just say that Nabal was not excited about the interruption to his day. So he insults David's men and sends them away in a very rude fashion. So when they return to camp and they tell David how they were treated, David began to prepare an army of 400 men to go exact revenge on Nabal for his insults and inhospitality. David's like, all right, he's rude to you. We're going to get the army. We're going to go kill him. And so some of the shepherds who were also in the field heard that David was preparing to come after Nabal. And being afraid of Nabal, they wanted to tell somebody, but they didn't want to tell him. The shepherds went and told Nabal's wife, whose name was Abigail. And so Abigail, she runs inside, and she takes, and this is a quote from this verse from 25th chapter of 1 Samuel. She takes 100 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loads them on a couple donkeys, and she goes to explain the whole situation to David and to beg him for forgiveness. So Abigail gets there. It happens. She explains. David forgives Nabal. And then here comes the awesome twist to this story. Abigail gets home, and Nabal is drunk because it is the feast season. And that's what you do in the feast season. You celebrate all of the things that you have. So Abigail decides not to tell him anything about David's army and her asking for forgiveness or any of that until the morning. But then, in the morning, after they wake up, when Abigail does tell Nabal, he is overcome by the situation to such an extreme degree that hearing all of this news about the army and David going to kill him and his wife going and giving him all these gifts, Nabal has a heart attack and dies on the spot. David then hears about this situation. David considers the heart attack God's punishment on Nabal for his insults and horrible behavior. And then David takes Abigail on as his third wife, which is just one of those crazy stories hidden in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. But I've been talking far too long. So Caroline, tell us about this recipe, and it's short. So if you don't mind, what are the ingredients? And I am looking at it now. The recipe is 2 sentences. So let's read this whole recipe.
So it's a pound of whole wheat kernels, a teaspoon of salt, water, and a teaspoon of olive oil. So you basically just sort of pan fry. It's like popcorn, except it's wheat corn. You just stir fry the kernels in a frying pan. You put a little bit of water on there while they're toasting to soften them up, and they just sort of like create sort of a snack, a popcorn snack, which I thought that was kind of fun, and I haven't been able to find wheat kernels in the grocery store, so I haven't been able to try it. But it looks fun and it looks tasty. Maybe Porsche's would have something like that.
Maybe Porsche's would have something like that. There's a
Wheat
plug.
kernels.
We are not getting paid for this in any way. But
thought of that.
yeah, Porsche's on what is that on Indianola is amazing, and they have all that kind of stuff. If Porsche's would like to give us money for that, we'd be open for that conversation. I don't think they will be. But think about this: Holy Week is coming up. This Sunday that we're coming up to Sunday, April 5th is Palm Sunday. You know, it was probably 15, 20 years ago. The Passion of the Christ came out. That Jim Caviezel movie. If you want to sit down with you and your loved one and your family and watch The Passion of Christ, and you're going to make popcorn anyway, you might as well make Abigail's Toasted Grain the biblical popcorn of this woman from the Old Testament.
Throw some of those OT spices on there too. Some cumin, onion powder, garlic powder,
Coriander. That's my favorite spice.
Yeah, he's got the whole seeds.
Yes,
seeds
I only buy coriander in raw seeds because I grind it down to use it fresh every time. If Christmas is rolling around and you go, what do we get, Pastor Hilly, for Christmas? The most bougie coriander raw seeds would be a great gift. But please don't. This is why we're tucking, my Christmas list this far down into this podcast.
It's in the farro soup too.
Well, coriander is, yeah. But
yeah.
I didn't use that opportunity to be like, hey, if you want to get me a Christmas present. Because this way we'll know if anybody has actually listened to this whole podcast. Mm-hmm. If on Christmas I get bougie coriander seeds, I'm going to slap my head and be like, oh my gosh, someone listened. And they heard me ranting on about Charlton Heston and the Planet of the Apes. But, it's good. If you're still with us, thank you. We got 2 more recipes. These 2 are going to be nestled in the New Testament. First one is called Martha Meatballs. And before we even talk about it, we know that any meatballs we talk about are not going to be as good as Dory Mayer's meatballs that she brings out for bereavement lunches and events in the fellowship hall and congregational meeting. So Dory, if you're listening, we know that these meatballs will not be as good as yours. And we can't wait until the social distancing is behind us and we can get together and have a potluck and you can make your meatballs. With that being said, Martha's meatballs, we know the story, Mary and Martha. Mary sits at the feet of Jesus, and Martha runs around preparing. And let me just say, if Martha was running around preparing meatballs, she must have been the first Lutheran, even before Martin Luther. Because if that's not the most Lutheran thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. Hey, we have a guest. Go get the meatballs happening. So, Caroline, tell me about Martha's meatballs.
Okay, so it's got a pound of chopped meat. You're mixing some salt and pepper in there, fried up with olive oil, and then the sauce is 1 sliced leek, 1 cup of concentrated vegetable soup, a 1/4 cup of sweet wine, 1 cup of chopped celery leaves, a tablespoon of fresh oregano or a 1/2 teaspoon of dried, salt and pepper, and a 1/2 cup of red wine. Sounds delicious.
Sounds delicious. and so when you listen, so a lot of that, you ground the meatballs, you stick them and you marinate all this together, right? Is that essentially how you do it?
Mix the seasonings, yep. And I think they want you to sort of marinate and cook everything in that sauce. With the vegetables and the wine and the soup all together. Just kind of blend all those tasty bits together.
Nice.
Yeah.
Huh. And we hadn't talked about this beforehand, but in the modern era, you throw all that in a crock pot and you turn it on.
That's right.
But if it's the 1st century, and it is a time not only before crock pots, but a time before electricity, I wonder how they did. Do you put it in an earthen jar and leave it out and just hope that the sunlight cooks it? Like, I wonder how they would do it.
Gotta be some fire there.
Oh,
yeah,
fire,
right?
yeah. Put it over the embers.
I guess, yeah. But then I'm thinking tinfoil. So there's got to be some metal or something that they use there.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Like a stone pot, stick it in the fire.
Pot, yep.
Or an iron pot and you have it hanging over the fire.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds somehow more dangerous than an
Fill
actual
those
crock
up,
pot.
marinate. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could definitely burn your tent down with one of those setups. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so where are we? Our last recipe, flavored olive oil. And if you've ever been to a good Mediterranean or Middle Eastern restaurant, one of the things that happens is they come out and they bring you bread. And again, I worked at a Mediterranean place in Chicago. We never brought butter. We brought bread sliced and then olive oil. Like that was the dipping sauce. So having a good flavored olive oil is quintessential. And I think that this really ties into the anointing at Bethany. It's Jesus, right before the triumphant entry, which is Palm Sunday, right before then. If you read about this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is hanging out and a woman comes up, an unnamed woman, and breaks an alabaster jar and takes out oil and anoints his feet and washes his feet with oil and dries his feet with her hair. If you read this story in John's gospel, John identifies that woman as being Mary, the sister of Martha. So maybe while Martha's making the meatballs, Mary is the one using the olive oil to wash or scent the Jesus. And so thinking about that, because, as we remember, the anointing at Bethany, they anoint Jesus with this olive oil. And then, depending on which Easter account you read, the women are the first people who arrive at the empty tomb. And there's that understanding that the fragrance is still there. So what kind of, first of all, what goes in this recipe? And secondly, my question is going to be is what kind of fragrance might these ingredients produce?
So basically what you do is you choose a sprig of herb of your choice.
Like coriander.
Coriander. There's a coriander. I think that's a seed of the cilantro plant. I think.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would transfer. It should
Yeah.
transfer to oil. But they list rosemary, hyssop, thyme, or garlic. So I definitely go for the garlic.
You would love
go
the
for
garlic.
the garlic. Soak the garlic or any one of the herbs after washing. You soak them in a bottle of olive oil. They suggest 10 days. And I've done this before. Soak it in olive oil. Soak the herb in olive oil, and then the flavor of the herb sort of saturates the oil, and then you can use it on salads and bread and all sorts of good stuff.
So depending on what the spice you put in it is, that's going to directly impact the odor that the olive oil will leave. Because olive oil will stick to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you would like grind up coriander, it would be a sweeter odor. If you did a garlic, it would have more of a vampire kind of smell.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Whatever you want. Yeah.
Right?
Is that how I smell?
No, I don't know. I'm just saying that whenever I smell garlic, that's what vampires don't
yes,
smell like.
That's it.
They don't like that.
They don't like that. Oh, lucky me then.
Lucky you.
Don't have to fear vampires.
You don't have to fear vampires. Yeah. And if Mary used garlic in hers, Jesus wouldn't have to fear vampires either.
See, that's the trick is that whoever you're eating with, you've got to feed them just as much garlic, if not a little bit more, because then they don't smell it on you. And then nobody knows.
Look at that.
Until you go out into public, and then everyone else smells it.
Goes,
whoa, that guy eats good.
That describes so much life. As long as you do it at home, nobody knows. It's not until you go in public that everybody's like, wait a second.
This is a perfect time to try this flavored olive oil recipe and just saturate it with garlic. Do really heavy garlic because everyone's going to keep 6 feet from you anyway. So
that's true.
No worries in offending anyone with your garlic cloud.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here first. Go eat as much garlic as you can during this social distancing quarantine.
It's good for immunity too.
It's good for your immunities, and no one, well, unless you're a dentist. If you're a dentist, because no one wants you breathing on them.
Well, they get the mask anyway.
You do have the mask. Yeah, so even if you are a
Could that
dentist,
be, right?
everybody eat as much garlic as you can. Think about the poor garlic farmers.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Or you know what you could do? Whatever you're using, whatever key spices on your Easter lamb or your Easter ham or your Easter turkey, go if you already know the recipe you're going to use for your Easter meal, use the key spice in that recipe as the spice in your flavored olive oil, and then that way it's a reminder. It's a, as we would say in the offertory, it is a foretaste of the feast to come, right? It's a small flavor.
Start the dinner with a little bit of the herbed olive oil. Yup, a little bit of bread.
Yep, and it's a teaser.
Through.
It's
Yeah.
a teaser through the week that gets you through the big ham. I mean, I don't like how Jesus is a ham in this analogy, but I think you see what we're saying.
To the big ham.
To the big ham. To the big ham. To the big lamb.
There we go.
That's right. Nice. All right. So, just as we begin to close down, this coming Thursday is Maundy Thursday, when we remember the institution of our Lord's Supper. Coupling that with the fact that us Lutherans do love to eat, I figured that looking at meals as we approach the festivities of Holy Week, and especially Easter lunch or Easter dinner, would be a really fun topic and a fun rabbit to kind of chase down the hole, to just consider food and the history of food and that sort of thing. Again, if you're interested in any of the recipes that we've covered in this episode, I'm going to put a link to this book, which is titled Food at the Time of the Bible, in the description below. Caroline, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Anything you want to go out saying?
More garlic.
More garlic.
Whenever you see garlic, triple it.
Always triple your garlic.
And a little bit more salt too to bring the garlic out.
A little salt, garlic, or garlic salt.
Garlic salt, there we go.
There we go.
I find that there's not a high enough garlic ratio in the garlic salt though. So if you want a little bit of garlic, you could do the garlic salt. But I would keep the actual granulated garlic or fresh on hand, so you could pump that up a little bit.
And I also learned that Caroline is not a fan for buying pre-minced garlic in the water.
In the water? No.
You got to buy the real thing.
Yeah, it just doesn't deliver that zing. No.
There it is.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming out. Listeners out there, thank you all as well for joining us. Everybody, during this time of social distancing, I know it's weird, and I know it's going to be weird in the week ahead, not being able to join together in worship for Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, and then for Easter Sunday. But you know, these are the times that we are in, and just know that you guys are in my thoughts and in my prayers, and I want you all to stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. God bless.